How is it possible that a seven-time world champion like Lewis Hamilton, fighting for the podium in Suzuka, suddenly loses everything without any explanation? Because what Ferrari has just revealed is not a simple drop in performance. It is a hidden problem that left Hamilton completely sold out in the middle of a race, while his own teammates seem to have a totally different car. Mechanical failure? Error in power management? Or something much more worrying within the team itself? The most shocking thing is not that Hamilton lost positions, it's that no one at Ferrari knew how to tell him why it was happening. And when Vasseur discovered the true cause, his reaction says it all. Today we're going to unravel what really happened with Ferrari in Japan and why this problem could change everything. What happened with Ferrari in the Japanese Grand Prix was not a simple bad result. It was the beginning of a mystery that not even the team itself could explain at the time. Everything seemed under control the start of the weekend, but from qualifying there were already worrying signs. Lewis Hamilton started from 6th position, his worst one-lap performance so far this season, a clear indication that something was not quite right with the SF26. Even so, what would come in the race would exceed any negative expectations. The start was clean, without any problems, and Hamilton began to build a solid race, managing the tires well and taking advantage of the opportunities that opened up ahead. Little by little, the British placed himself in a competitive position, climbing to 3rd place. At that moment, everything pointed to an important result for Ferrari, a podium that could reinforce the project's confidence and confirm that the team was in real contention for the championship. But it was right there, at the most promising moment, where everything began to break. Without warning, without visible errors, without a direct battle to justify the fall, Hamilton began to lose performance. First, it was a slight loss of rhythm, something that could seem normal within a management phase. But it quickly became something much more obvious. The rivals began to approach each other with abnormal ease. Charles Leclerc surpassed him, then George Russell, and later Lando Norris. The most shocking thing was not losing positions, but Hamilton's total inability to defend himself. It was as if his car was limited, as if he were competing in a different category within the same race. From the cockpit, the feeling was clear. The car was not responding. There was not enough power on the straights. There was not that necessary push at corner exit that makes the difference on a circuit like Suzuka. Hamilton wasn't making mistakes. He just didn't have the tools to fight. And that is what makes this moment so critical, because when a driver of his level cannot do anything, the problem stops being human and becomes completely structural. Crossing the finish line in 6th position, the result was already disappointing, but subsequent statements were even more revealing. Hamilton didn't talk about strategy, tires, or traffic. It went straight to the core of the problem, lack of power. A loss that, according to himself, had been present practically throughout the race, although it became much more evident in the second stint. The most disturbing thing is that he didn't even have a clear explanation at the time, which is evidence that Ferrari didn't fully understand what had happened either. This is the turning point of the weekend. Because here we are no longer talking about poor execution, but rather a hidden failure that appears at the worst possible moment and leaves one of the most experienced pilots in history completely exposed. Meanwhile, on the other side of the garage, the story was completely different, and that difference is what would end up setting off all the alarms within the team. What Ferrari would discover next would completely change the interpretation of what happened at Suzuka. What seemed like a simple loss of performance in the race began to transform, hours after the Japanese Grand Prix, into something much more disturbing within Ferrari. Because when the team begins to analyze the data, the first element appears that completely changes the narrative. Lewis Hamilton's numbers did not match those of Charles Leclerc. And we're not talking about normal small differences between drivers, we're talking about a clear gap in power delivery. Hamilton had felt it on the track, but upon reviewing the telemetry, the suspicion was confirmed. His car was not delivering the same energy as his teammates. This detail is the critical point of the entire story because it breaks the internal logic of the team. Both drivers compete with the same car, the same power unit, the same technical base, and yet one of them was clearly limited. This is where Frédéric Vasseur is completely surprised. Not because of the result itself, but because of what this finding implies. Because if the problem were general, Ferrari would detect it immediately in both cars. But it wasn't like that. Leclerc not only did not suffer that loss, but showed a competitive performance, even capable of fighting for podium positions. This internal difference makes Hamilton's case an extremely delicate technical anomaly. From that moment on, Ferrari enters a deep research phase. The first hypotheses point directly to the most complex system in current Formula One, energy management. In 2026, the power of the car no longer depends only on the combustion engine, but on a millimeter balance between the hybrid system, energy recovery, and its release at key moments. Any failure in that ecosystem can cause exactly what Hamilton suffered: a car that loses speed on the straight, that does not accelerate as it should, and that is completely exposed to its rivals. But what is really worrying is that this type of failure is not always evident. It could be a problem in the MGUK, poor battery management, a loss in energy recovery, or even an error in the electronic parameters that control the entire system. And worst of all, these failures may not leave an immediate clear signal, which explains why neither the driver nor the team had a response in the middle of the weekend. Hamilton, when comparing directly with Leclerc, made it clear without saying it explicitly, something was not right with his car. Because when you see that your teammate accelerates more, defends better, and has tools that you don't have, the conclusion is inevitable. And that is exactly what sets off all the alarms within Ferrari. This discovery not only explains what happened in Suzuka, it turns it into a structural problem that can be repeated. Because if Ferrari does not fully understand the origin of that power loss, it cannot guarantee that it will not happen again. And in a season where every point counts, this kind of uncertainty can be devastating. Vasseur knows it, and that's why his reaction is not one of frustration. It's one of concern, because now Ferrari not only has to compete against its rivals. You have to understand what is going wrong inside your own car. After discovering the anomaly, Ferrari enters an even more delicate phase, understanding the real scope of the problem. Because it is one thing to detect that Hamilton had less power, and quite another to know why it happened, and if it can happen again. And this is where the situation becomes truly critical. The analysis after the Japanese Grand Prix does not provide a clear and immediate answer. There's no obvious broken part, no traditional mechanical failure that you can change and forget about. What there is irregular behavior within an extremely complex system, where multiple variables interact at the same time. And that is what worries Vasseur the most, because it means that Ferrari is not in full control of what happened at Suzuka. This type of problem is the worst possible scenario for a Formula One team. It is not visible, it is not constant, and is not easy to replicate in simulations. It can appear at any time, under certain specific conditions, and disappear without leaving a clear trace. That turns every race into a mystery, especially for Hamilton, who now knows that he may be competing with a car that at any moment can fail him without warning. And this is where the psychological factor comes in, which is often overlooked. A rider needs complete confidence in his machine to push it to the limit. But after what happened in Japan, that trust is broken. Because Hamilton no longer only competes against his rivals, he also competes against the uncertainty of his own car. And in modern Formula One, where the differences are minimal, that doubt can make the difference between fighting for a podium or being left out of the fight. Ferrari, for its part, faces a huge dilemma. If the problem was an isolated case, they need to identify exactly what caused it to prevent it from recurring. But if it is something deeper than a failure in the architecture of the hybrid system, in energy management, or in the integration of components, then we are facing a structural problem that could compromise the entire season. And the most alarming thing is that, at this point, there are no guarantees. Vasseur's reaction reflects this perfectly. There are no explosive statements, there are no public excuses, there is silence and analysis. A silence that in Formula One is usually more revealing than any explanation. Because when a team doesn't communicate clearly, it's usually because it doesn't have answers yet. And that leaves us with a disturbing conclusion. What happened in Japan is not just an anecdote within the championship, it is a warning. Ferrari has the pace, it has the car to fight at the top, but now it knows that there's a variable out of control. And if they can't fix it quickly, this problem will not only cost Hamilton points, it could cost them the entire championship. What Ferrari discovered after the Japanese Grand Prix goes far beyond a simple loss of points. It is a direct warning about a weakness that can change the course of its entire season. Because when a team fighting for the championship does not fully understand why one of its cars loses performance so drastically, the problem is no longer a one-time problem and becomes a constant threat. Hamilton not only lost a possible podium in Suzuka, he lost something even more important, the certainty that his car will respond when he needs it most. And in an environment where everything is decided by thousandths, that uncertainty is unacceptable. The most disturbing thing is that Ferrari still does not have a clear answer yet, and that puts both the driver and the team in an extremely vulnerable position. Meanwhile, the contrast with Leclerc leaves an even more uncomfortable image. Within the same team, with the same tools, there are differences that should not exist. And that's what really worries Vasseur, because it reveals that Ferrari has not yet fully mastered its own technical package in this new era. The big question now is not what happened in Japan, but when it can happen again. Because if Ferrari fails to isolate and eliminate this problem, every race will become a roulette wheel. And in such a close fight for the championship, the fastest doesn't necessarily win. The most consistent wins. Ferrari has the potential, it has the car, and it has two drivers capable of fighting for everything. But after Japan, he also has a doubt that he cannot afford. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.